A guy outside Austin spent $400 on a portable air conditioner to rescue his oyster mushrooms. It worked, in the sense that his spare bedroom went from 86 degrees down to 72, which is textbook range. 9 days later, the entire flush aborted exactly the way the first one had, brown at the tips and shriveled at the edges. And he threw the block in the trash and told his wife mushrooms were a scam. That should stop you for a second, because it means the heat was never the thing killing his crop. Straight answer before you go anywhere: yes, oyster mushrooms will fruit in an 85-degree room. Mushroom Mountain, a cultivation company in South Carolina, says pink oysters can fruit in 7 to 10 days at 85 to 90 degrees. That is not surviving the heat, that is producing faster than most people manage in a cool basement. But two things have to be true at once, and if you get one of them wrong, your pins will keep dying while your thermometer sits there looking innocent. Start with why the air conditioner backfired, because it explains the whole video in about 30 seconds. An air conditioner is a dehumidifier that happens to blow cold. That is literally how it works. Warm air passes over a cold coil, moisture condenses out of it, and that water drains away down a tube. So when he dropped that room to 72, he also dragged the relative humidity down into the 40s. His mushrooms went from hot and thirsty to cool and thirsty. Same depth, better temperature. Now, let me back up and tell the story properly, because you have probably lived some version of it. He bought a blue oyster kit in June. Anybody would. The photos are gorgeous, steel blue caps stacked like roof shingles. He cut the X in the bag, misted 4 times a day like the label said, and for 5 days it looked like a win. Hundreds of little gray pinheads crowding out of that slit, doubling overnight. Day 6, half of them browned at the tip and the rest simply stopped, frozen mid-growth. By day 8, the cluster was dry and leathery and looked like something you would find behind a radiator. If you've been there, you know the specific taste of that. Everything looks perfect and then it quietly stalls. Caps crack across the top like dried mud, edges curl upward and go stiff, and every form thread gives you a different diagnosis, which somehow makes the whole thing worse. Here is the first mistake, and most of us make it once. He picked a cold weather mushroom and asked it to work a July shift. Blue oyster is a strain of Pleurotus ostreatus, and it fruits cold. Field and Forest lists its best fruiting temperature at 60 to 65 degrees for good color and yield, and they specifically warn that its spawn run should not exceed 80. Ohio State's mycology program puts the wider fruiting window for Oystriatus at 55 to 75 degrees. At 85, that mushroom is not dead, it's just miserable. Thin fruits, washed-out color, and pins that give up the moment the air gets dry. Pink oyster is a completely different animal. Pleurotus gemmicore is tropical. Fungi perfecti lists its fruiting range at 65 to 85 degrees and notes it needs temperatures above 70 before it will even start. Golden oyster is similar, and Mushroom Mountain puts its optimum between 75 and 90, pointing out that it produces when other strains have gone dormant in summer heat. Phoenix oyster, Pleurotus pulmonarius, is the classic summer species and works comfortably from about 60 up to 80, though it starts to thin out above that. Treat these as separate crops rather than flavors of the same one. Nobody plants spinach in a Texas August and then blames the weather. They plant okra. Switching strains solves maybe 60% of your problem. The other 40% is the part almost nobody explains, and it is why some people still fail after buying pink oyster spawn. Warm air holds more water vapor than cool air. That means it also pulls water out of things faster when it is not already full. At 85 degrees, a room sitting at 60% humidity is stripping moisture off your caps significantly harder than a 65-degree room at that same 60% reading. Identical number on the hygrometer, completely different pressure on the mushroom. Growers call this vapor pressure deficit. You can just call it thirst. Research on Pleurotus puts fresh fruiting bodies at roughly 85 to 90% water, and a baby mushroom has no skin to hold that in. It grows by pushing water outward into new tissue. When the surrounding air takes moisture away faster than the mycelium can push it out, the pin stops. That is what aborting is. It gets blamed on temperature nearly every time, which changes the job description. In a hot room, you are not really managing a room. You are managing the surface moisture on about 2 square feet of mushroom, and that's a much smaller problem than the one people think they have. So do not cool the room. Shrink it. Get a clear plastic storage tote, a wire shelf with a clear cover, or a cheap grow tent, anything that puts a transparent wall between your block and the rest of the house. Inside that little box, you can hold 85 to 90% humidity with almost no effort, because you're humidifying 6 cubic feet instead of 1,000. Your house stays 86 degrees and you stop caring. Put a shallow tray in the bottom and fill it with perlite, then add water until the perlite is soaked but not swimming. Perlite has an enormous amount of surface area, so it releases moisture steadily all day without you doing anything. If you'd rather not buy perlite, a damp bath towel draped down one inside wall does most of the same work. Set the block on a rack or an upturned pot so it sits above the water and never in it. Standing water wicks up into the substrate, and warm, wet substrate is where bacteria have the best week of their lives. Placement matters more than people expect. Keep the setup off the floor, out of direct afternoon sun through a window, and out of the path of any AC vent or ceiling fan. Direct moving air across a fruiting block in a warm room will dry a flush faster than anything else you can do to it. Which brings up the contradiction. Mushrooms exhale carbon dioxide, and in a sealed tote, that CO2 pools quickly. Oyster mushrooms respond by growing long, spindly stems with tiny caps reaching for air that is not there. Heat makes them respire faster, so it builds sooner than you would guess. You need fresh air then, without letting it hit the caps. Poke small holes in the sides of the tote rather than the lid, and leave the lid cracked about an inch. If you want a fan, point it at a wall 3 feet away so the air arrives already scattered and slow. Soft drift is the goal. If you can see the mushrooms moving, dial it back. Twice a day, open the whole thing for 30 seconds and wave a piece of cardboard through it, then close it up. Full air exchange, barely any moisture lost. Misting is where good intentions do real damage. Penn State Extension puts it plainly. Bacterial blotch is probable when mushroom surfaces do not dry after watering. Droplets sitting on caps for hours are an open invitation to blotch bacteria, and warm rooms speed all of that up. You get yellow spots that darken to brown, then slimy sunken patches, and the texture is ruined even though the mushrooms are safe to eat. So, aim the sprayer at the walls of your tent and at the perlite instead of at the mushrooms. Let humidity reach them as vapor. If you see beads of water sitting on a cap, crack the lid until they evaporate. Your daily check takes about 4 minutes. In the morning, look before you touch anything. Pin tips white and slightly moist means you're fine. Tan and papery means the air is too dry, so mist the walls and top up the tray. Long stems with small caps means CO2, so open things up more. Fan it out, close it, walk away. Repeat in the evening. Heat stress shows up as cracked cap surfaces and curled stiff edges, and as clusters that sprint for 2 days then stall overnight. All of that points back at moisture rather than degrees. If pins do abort on you partway through, clear the dead ones off so they do not rot on the block, fix whatever the air was doing, and wait. Oyster mycelium usually has enough energy in reserve to pin again within 4 or 5 days, and that second attempt is frequently the better crop. Contamination worries people at this temperature more than it should. Heat speeds up green mold, but it speeds up a warm strain even more, and a fast colonizer defends its own territory pretty well. What tips that fight is standing water and stagnant air, which you have already dealt with. One small thing that surprises people, a cheap hygrometer becomes useful the moment you put it inside the tent because it finally measures the space the mushrooms live in. Across the room on a shelf, it only ever told you about the room. Harvest timing changes too, and this one catches everybody. Warm conditions compress the schedule. Pink oyster can go from pin to picking in 3 or 4 days, and the gap between perfect and overripe might be 12 hours. Pick while the cap edges still curl downward before they flatten and start turning up. Once they flatten, spore drop starts and the texture softens fast. Field and Forest recommends using pink oyster within 48 hours of harvest, so decide what you are cooking before you decide to pick. Twist the cluster off at the base instead of cutting it. Leftover stubs rot quickly in a warm room and become a bacteria problem for the next flush. The guy in Austin returned the air conditioner. He bought a pink oyster block instead, plus a clear tote and a bag of perlite. Same bedroom, same 86 degrees, same brutal Texas July, and this time he left the thermostat alone. He harvested a cluster the color of coral about 2 weeks later. The room never changed at all. The 6 cubic feet around the block did. That is really the whole trick. Pick a strain that wants the heat instead of tolerating it, then stop fighting your house and control the small box the mushrooms live in.